The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Westfield Academy's music hall as Mr. Davidson arranged sheet music on the piano. 30 years of teaching had left him with graying hair at his temples and deep lines around his eyes that crinkled when he smiled, which wasn't often these days. He straightened his tie and glanced at the clock. Another school year, another crop of students who mostly took piano because their parents made them. Mr. Davidson prided himself on spotting talent. In 3 decades, he'd discovered 7 students who went on to music conservatories. 7 stars in a sky of thousands. Not bad, he thought to himself as he tapped a pencil against the polished wood of the grand piano. The bell rang and students began filing into the music room. The usual faces: Lily Chen, already accomplished at 12. Thomas Williams, who had potential but lacked discipline. Zoe Patterson, more interested in her phone than the piano. Mr. Davidson nodded as they took their seats. Then he noticed an unfamiliar face. A thin boy with dark hair that needed a trim slipped into the back row, eyes downcast. His uniform looked a size too big, the blazer sleeves hanging past his wrists, and his shoes were scuffed beyond what a normal day's wear would cause. Mr. Davidson checked his class roster. "Elijah Santos?" he called out. The boy's head jerked up. "Here, sir," he said so softly that Mr. Davidson had to strain to hear him. "You're new to Westfield?" Elijah nodded, then seemed to remember himself. "Yes, sir. Scholarship student." Just transferred. A scholarship student. That explained the ill-fitting uniform, probably second-hand. Mr. Davidson made a mental note but didn't give it much more thought. Every few years, Westfield admitted a handful of scholarship students from the surrounding neighborhoods. Most didn't last. The academic rigor was too much, or they couldn't fit in with the wealthy student body. "Very well. We're working on Chopin's simpler preludes this month. Have you played any Chopin before?" Elijah's gaze dropped to his desk. "A little, sir. We'll see where you stand after class. For now, observe." Mr. Davidson turned his attention to the rest of the class, demonstrating proper hand positions for the prelude in E minor. As he spoke, he caught glimpses of Elijah from the corner of his eye. The boy wasn't taking notes like the others. He just watched, his expression unreadable. After the lecture portion, Mr. Davidson called students to the piano one by one to demonstrate what they'd practiced from last week. When it was finally Elijah's turn, the boy approached the bench like it might bite him. "Just a simple C major scale to start," Mr. Davidson said, trying to keep the impatience from his voice. "Let's see what you know." Elijah sat at the piano, his posture terrible, shoulders hunched, elbows too low. When he placed his hands on the keys, his fingers curved properly, but they trembled slightly. He played the scale slowly, missing 2 notes and hesitating between transitions. Mr. Davidson frowned. "Again, please. And sit up straight." The boy tried once more with similar results. Around the room, a few students exchanged glances. Thomas snickered behind his hand. "That's enough for today," Mr. Davidson said, making a note in his gradebook. "Practice the scale for next week." Relief flooded Elijah's face as he hurried back to his seat. Mr. Davidson felt a pang of disappointment. The boy's application had noted some musical background, but that appeared to be a generous assessment. Over the next few weeks, Mr. Davidson kept an eye on Elijah. Unlike the other students who practiced during lunch breaks on the school's pianos, Elijah was never seen near the music room outside class time. During lessons, he remained quiet, answering questions with bare minimum responses. His playing showed little improvement, still halting, still nervous. "Mr. Santos, have you been practicing at all?" Mr. Davidson asked one day after a particularly poor performance of a simple Bach piece. "Yes, sir," Elijah replied, eyes fixed on the floor. "How often?" "When I can, sir," Mr. Davidson sighed. "That's not good enough for Westfield. This isn't a public school where just showing up gets you a passing grade." A flush crept up Elijah's neck, but he said nothing. After class, Mr. Davidson noticed Elijah lingering, slowly packing his bag long after the other students had left. The boy approached the piano when he thought no one was watching, reaching out as if to touch the keys, then pulling his hand back at the last moment. "Did you need something, Mr. Santos?" Mr. Davidson called out. Elijah jumped, nearly dropping his backpack. "No, sir. Sorry, sir." He hurried from the room. Curious, Mr. Davidson stopped by the admin office later that day. "The new scholarship student, Elijah Santos. What's his story?" Mrs. Winters, the administrative assistant who knew everything about everyone at Westfield, lowered her voice. Lives with his grandmother in Pine Heights. Parents died in a car accident 2 years ago. The grandmother works as a home health aide. Long hours, not much pay. He got the scholarship based on his academic scores, not music. Actually, I think music was added to his schedule because they needed to fill his arts requirement. I see, Mr. Davidson said, feeling slightly guilty about his impatience with the boy. Still, Westfield had standards. If Elijah couldn't keep up, perhaps another arts class would suit him better. The next day, Mr. Davidson noticed Elijah eating lunch alone on a bench in the courtyard. The boy had brought a brown paper bag lunch while most students bought from the cafeteria. As Mr. Davidson walked past, he saw Elijah's lunch, a single peanut butter sandwich and an apple. Elijah wasn't practicing because he was hungry, Mr. Davidson thought with sudden clarity. He was conserving energy. The realization made him pause. Still, when Elijah came to class that afternoon and fumbled through his assigned piece again, Mr. Davidson's frustration returned. The boy wasn't even trying. Or if he was, he had no aptitude for music. After class, Mr. Davidson asked Elijah to stay behind. "Your performance isn't improving, Mr. Santos. Do you actually want to learn piano?" Elijah looked up, and for the first time, Mr. Davidson saw a flash of something in the boy's eyes. Not fear or embarrassment, but something else. Something like longing. "Yes, sir, I do." "Then why aren't you practicing?" "The practice rooms are open during lunch and after school." Elijah shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "I have to catch the city bus right after school. Last one that goes to my neighborhood leaves at 3:45, and lunch?" The boy hesitated. "I need to finish homework sometimes." Mr. Davidson didn't believe him, but he didn't press. "Well, something needs to change. At this rate, you won't pass this class." For the first time, alarm showed clearly on Elijah's face. "I need to pass all my classes to keep my scholarship." Mr. Davidson hadn't known that, but it made sense. "Then I suggest you find time to practice, Mr. Santos." The following week, Mr. Davidson arrived early to catch up on grading. As he approached the music room, he heard something that made him stop in his tracks. Someone was playing the piano, hesitantly, hitting wrong notes frequently, but playing nonetheless. He peered through the small window in the door. Elijah sat at the piano, his brow furrowed in concentration as he worked through the piece he'd been struggling with in class. His technique was all wrong, his timing off, but he was trying. The boy kept stopping, shaking out his hands, then starting again from the beginning. Mr. Davidson checked his watch. It was 6:45 a.m., almost an hour before school officially opened. How had Elijah gotten in so early? As if answering his unspoken question, the janitor, Mr. Reyes, poked his head into the music room. 10 more minutes, kid. Then I gotta lock up to do my rounds before the bell." Elijah nodded gratefully. "Thanks, Mr. Reyes." Mr. Davidson stepped back from the door, oddly moved. The boy was trying after all, sneaking in early to practice before anyone else arrived. But even with this effort, his playing was still far below Westfield standards. Perhaps, Mr. Davidson thought as he walked away to give Elijah his privacy, what the boy needed wasn't criticism but a challenge. Something to either spark his hidden potential or show him definitively that music wasn't his path. Either way, it would be a kindness to not let him struggle through another month of mediocrity. That afternoon, as class ended, Mr. Davidson made his decision. Tomorrow he would assign pieces for the winter recital, and Elijah Santos would get a piece so difficult, so technically demanding, that it would force a turning point one way or another. What Mr. Davidson couldn't possibly know was that this decision would change both their lives forever. Mr. Davidson arrived at school the next morning with a stack of sheet music tucked under his arm. He'd stayed up late, carefully selecting pieces for each student in his class. For most, he'd chosen compositions that would challenge them just enough, pieces that stretched their abilities but remained within reach with proper practice. For Elijah Santos, though, Mr. Davidson had selected something entirely different. As he unlocked the music room door, he pulled out the piece he'd chosen for the boy, Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-Scare minor. Known among pianists as a technical monster, the piece demanded enormous handspans, incredible dexterity, and a mature emotional understanding that most adult pianists struggled to convey. It was wildly beyond what a beginning student could handle, which was precisely why Mr. Davidson had chosen it. He spread the sheet music across his desk, sorting each student's assignment into neat piles. Some might call his decision about Elijah cruel, but Mr. Davidson saw it differently. The boy clearly didn't have natural talent, yet he was desperate to pass the class. This impossible challenge would force him to either find hidden reserves of ability or accept that music wasn't his path. Either way, the uncertainty would end. The first bell rang and students began trickling into the classroom. Mr. Davidson noticed Elijah slip in just before the final bell, looking tired. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his uniform was even more rumpled than usual. The boy slid into his seat at the back of the room, pulling out his notebook without making eye contact with anyone. "Good morning, everyone," Mr. Davidson began, standing tall at the front of the room. "Today is an important day. As you know, the winter recital is 6 weeks away, and it's time to assign your performance pieces." A murmur of excitement ran through the classroom. The winter recital was one of Westfield's most prestigious events. Parents, board members, and even local news sometimes attended. A good performance could cement a student's reputation. A poor one could haunt them until graduation. "I've selected pieces that I believe will showcase each of your talents," Mr. Davidson continued. "These aren't just random assignments. I've chosen music that will challenge you appropriately and highlight your specific skills." He began calling students up one by one. Lily Chen received Bach's Invention No. 13, challenging but perfect for her precise style. Thomas Williams got a Chopin waltz that would force him to work on his expression while playing to his technical strengths. Each student examined their sheet music with a mix of nervous excitement. When only Elijah remained, Mr. Davidson paused for dramatic effect. The classroom had grown quiet, everyone curious about what the struggling scholarship student would receive. "Elijah Santos," Mr. Davidson called, holding up the final packet of sheet music. Elijah rose slowly and approached the front desk. His eyes were downcast, his shoulders hunched as if expecting a blow. "This," Mr. Davidson said, handing over the thick packet, "is Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C minor. It will be your recital piece." Several gasps echoed through the room. Thomas let out a low whistle. Lily's eyes widened in disbelief. Elijah stared at the sheet music, his expression unreadable. The first page alone was intimidating, dense with notes. "Complex time signatures and dynamic markings, sir," he said quietly. "I don't think I can—" "Everyone feels that way about challenging pieces at first," Mr. Davidson interrupted. "You have 6 weeks to prepare. I suggest you use them wisely." Elijah's hands trembled as he took the music back to his desk. Around him, students were whispering, throwing glances his way, some pitying, others amused. "Now," Mr. Davidson continued, "let's talk about the recital logistics. Each of you will have 5 minutes to perform. Professional attire is required, black suits or dresses. The recital begins at 7 p.m. on December 15th, but you'll need to arrive at 6 for warm-up." As he spoke, Mr. Davidson watched Elijah from the corner of his eye. The boy was flipping through the pages of the Rachmaninoff piece, his expression shifting from confusion to something like terror. Good, Mr. Davidson thought. He's beginning to understand the magnitude of the challenge. When class ended, the students filed out, chattering excitedly about their assignments. Only Elijah remained seated, still staring at the sheet music. Mr. Davidson gathered his things, pretending not to notice. He was nearly at the door when Elijah finally spoke. "Mr. Davidson?" The teacher turned. "Yes?" "Why this piece?" Elijah asked, his voice barely audible. It's much harder than what the others got." Mr. Davidson considered his answer carefully. "Sometimes, Mr. Santos, a student needs to be pushed beyond what they think they can handle." "But I've only been playing for a few weeks," Elijah protested, a rare show of backbone. "This piece is for advanced pianists. Then perhaps this assignment will help us both determine if piano is really where you belong," Mr. Davidson replied coolly. "The winter recital is mandatory for passing this class. I expect to see you perform, ready or not." He left Elijah sitting alone in the classroom, feeling a twinge of guilt that he quickly suppressed. This was necessary. Cruel to be kind, as the saying went. The next day, Mr. Davidson was surprised when Elijah approached him before class. "Sir, is there any chance I could get a different piece?" the boy asked, eyes pleading. "Any piece. Even something harder than what the others have, just..." Not this, Mr. Davidson frowned. The assignments are final, Mr. Santos. Everyone faces challenges in life. How we respond to them defines us. Why, please, sir. My scholarship will require you to overcome obstacles, Mr. Davidson finished for him. Consider this your first major test at Westfield. Elijah's shoulders slumped, defeat written across his face. He returned to his seat without another word. As the week progressed, Mr. Davidson noticed changes in Elijah's behavior. The boy started arriving even earlier to school. Mr. Reyes mentioned he'd been showing up at 6 a.m. to practice. He stopped eating lunch in the courtyard, instead spending those precious 30 minutes in the practice rooms. When asked to perform in class, he still stumbled through simple exercises, but there was a new intensity to his focus. He's going to humiliate himself, Mrs. Parker, the choir director, remarked when Mr. Davidson mentioned Elijah's assignment during a faculty meeting. Rachmaninoff? For a beginner? That's not setting high expectations, Henry. That's setting him up to fail. Sometimes failure is the most valuable lesson, Mr. Davidson replied, though the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. 2 weeks into the assignment, Mr. Davidson arrived early to find Elijah already at the piano, practicing. The boy didn't notice him enter, too absorbed in attempting the first page of the prelude. His playing was painfully slow. Each chord struck separately instead of flowing together as the piece demanded. Wrong notes rang out frequently, making Mr. Davidson wince. "You're not making much progress," he observed, causing Elijah to jump. "I'm trying, sir," Elijah said, his voice strained. "I really am." Mr. Davidson looked at the boy's hands on the keyboard, small, the fingers unable to stretch across the massive chords that Rachmaninoff had composed for his own famously large hands. "Have you considered that some physical limitations can't be overcome with mere practice?" Mr. Davidson asked, suddenly feeling cruel for assigning a piece that required handspans the boy simply didn't have. "I'll figure it out," Elijah said stubbornly. "I have to." As the weeks passed, Mr. Davidson watched Elijah struggle. The boy was practicing more than anyone else in the class. Early mornings, lunch periods, staying after school until the last possible moment before his bus left. Yet the Rachmaninoff remained far beyond his capabilities. Other teachers began to notice. "Your scholarship student looks exhausted," the English teacher commented. "He fell asleep in my class yesterday. Is everything all right?" Mr. Davidson brushed off their concerns, but privately, he was beginning to question his decision. What had begun as a way to push Elijah toward his true path now felt needlessly harsh. Still, backing down now would undermine his authority as a teacher. The assignment would stand. 4 weeks before the recital, Mr. Davidson overheard 2 students talking after class. "Did you see Santos trying to play that Rachmaninoff piece?" Thomas laughed. "It's like watching a toddler try to drive a car." "Mr. Davidson must really hate him," Lily replied. "Nobody gives a beginner Rachmaninoff. It's just mean." Mr. Davidson cleared his throat loudly and the students scattered. Their words lingered, though, echoing his own growing doubts. That afternoon he found himself outside the practice room where Elijah was working. The music had stopped, and through the small window in the door, Mr. Davidson could see the boy with his head in his hands, shoulders shaking. He was crying, silently but unmistakably breaking down under the pressure. Mr. Davidson reached for the door handle, then paused. What would he say? That he'd been testing Elijah? That he'd never expected him to succeed? That the whole exercise had been designed to push the boy out of music class? Before he could decide, Elijah straightened up, wiped his face with his sleeve, and placed his hands back on the keys. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a moment, and began again from the beginning, still struggling, still making mistakes but refusing to give up. Mr. Davidson walked away, a complicated mix of emotions churning in his chest. He'd intended to teach Elijah a lesson about limitations and realistic expectations. Instead, the boy was teaching him something about determination and resilience. The recital was approaching, and something would have to give. Mr. Davidson just wasn't sure what or who it would be. The November wind cut through Elijah's thin jacket as he hurried down Pine Street. School had ended an hour ago, but instead of going straight home, he took a different route. The sun was already setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that Elijah barely noticed as he clutched his backpack straps tightly. Inside was the sheet music that had become both his nightmare and his obsession, Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C minor. The community center appeared ahead, a plain brick building with peeling paint and a sign that had faded years ago. It wasn't much to look at, but to Elijah, it had become the most important place in his world. He pushed open the heavy door and nodded at the security guard who recognized him by now. "Afternoon, piano boy," the man said with a friendly smile. "Hi, Mr. Wilson," Elijah replied, already heading for the recreation room at the back of the building. The community center served the Pine Heights neighborhood, one of the poorest areas in the city. It offered after-school programs, senior activities, and a food pantry on Wednesdays. More importantly for Elijah, it had an old upright piano donated by a church years ago. The piano was out of tune in places, with a few sticky keys and a wobbly bench, but it was the only one Elijah could access. He slipped into the recreation room, relieved to find it empty. He had exactly 1 hour before the evening youth program started, when kids would fill the space with noise and games. 1 hour to practice the impossible piece. Elijah set up his music on the worn piano stand and started his warm-up exercises. His fingers were stiff from the cold walk, but they loosened as he played scales and simple chord progressions. Then he took a deep breath and turned to the Rachmaninoff. The first measures were daunting, heavy chords that stretched his small hands to their limits. He'd been working on them for weeks now, but they still sounded choppy and disconnected. Rachmaninoff had famously large hands, able to span 12 keys. Elijah could barely reach 9. "You're still working on that piece?" a voice asked from the doorway. Elijah looked up to see Ms. Reyes, the center's volunteer coordinator. She was a kind woman in her 40s with curly hair and glasses that always seemed to be sliding down her nose. "Yes, ma'am," Elijah said. "It's for my school recital." Ms. Reyes stepped into the room carrying a stack of pamphlets. "Sounds pretty advanced. I used to play a little piano in college, and that sounds like Rachmaninoff." Elijah nodded, impressed by her recognition. "It's his Prelude in C minor." Ms. Reyes's eyebrows shot up. "That's a serious piece. How long have you been playing?" Elijah hesitated, unsure how to answer. According to his Westfield records, he'd been playing for less than 3 months. But the truth was more complicated. "My mother taught me," he said finally. "Before," Ms. Reyes nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Most people at the center knew Elijah's situation. I've noticed you coming here almost every day. You must really want to learn this piece." "I have to," Elijah said simply. "If I don't perform it at the recital, I'll fail music class. And if I fail any class, I lose my scholarship." Ms. Reyes frowned. "Your teacher assigned you Rachmaninoff as a beginner? That seems unfair." Elijah shrugged, not wanting to complain about Mr. Davidson. "He thinks I need to be challenged." "Well," Ms. Reyes said, putting down her pamphlets, "I don't want to interrupt your practice time. But if you need anything, a snack, some water, just let me know." "Thank you," Elijah said, turning back to the piano. For the next 45 minutes, he lost himself in the music, working section by section through the difficult prelude. His small fingers stretched painfully across the chords, sometimes hitting wrong notes, sometimes finding unexpected solutions to the handspan problem by breaking the chords slightly or using creative fingering. When his hour was up, he packed his things reluctantly. The youth program kids were already gathering outside, their voices loud in the hallway. "See you tomorrow, Elijah?" Ms. Reyes asked as he headed for the door. "Yes, ma'am. Every day until the recital." The walk home took another 30 minutes. By the time Elijah reached the small apartment he shared with his grandmother, it was fully dark and much colder. He unlocked the door quietly, not wanting to disturb his grandmother if she was sleeping. The apartment was small, just 1 bedroom, which his grandmother used, a tiny kitchen, and a living room where Elijah slept on a pull-out couch. The furniture was worn but clean, and photos of Elijah's parents hung on the walls. His grandmother was sitting at the kitchen table, still wearing her nurse's aide uniform. She looked up when Elijah entered, her tired face brightening. "There you are," she said, her Filipino accent stronger when she was exhausted. "I was getting worried." "Sorry, Lola," Elijah said, using the Filipino term for grandmother. "I was practicing at the community center again." His grandmother nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Have you eaten? There's some leftover adobo in the fridge." Elijah heated up the food while his grandmother asked about his day at school. He told her about his classes but left out the difficulties with the piano piece. She had enough to worry about without adding his problems to her burden. After dinner, Elijah spread his homework across the small coffee table. His grandmother watched him from her seat at the kitchen table, where she was sorting pills into a weekly organizer. "Your mother would be so proud of you," she said suddenly, "working so hard at your studies and playing piano again." Elijah looked up, throat tightening. "I'm not very good anymore," he admitted. "Not like when she was teaching me." His grandmother smiled sadly. "You were so little then, but you had a gift. She could see it even when you were just 4 years old." Memories flooded back. Sitting at their old piano, his mother's gentle hands guiding his small fingers across the keys. The apartment they'd had then was bigger, filled with music and laughter. Before the accident that took both his parents, before they had to sell the piano to pay medical bills. "I wish we still had the piano," Elijah said quietly. His grandmother sighed. "Me too, Anak, but we do what we must to survive." She glanced at the clock. "It's getting late. You should sleep soon." Later, after his grandmother had gone to bed and Elijah had pulled out the sofa bed, he lay in the darkness, his fingers moving silently in the air above him, practicing the Rachmaninoff piece without a piano. He could hear the music in his head, not just as he played it at the community center, but as it should sound. Somewhere in his memory, the piece existed perfectly, waiting to be unlocked. The next day at school, Mr. Davidson called on Elijah during class. "Mr. Santos, please demonstrate the first page of your recital piece." The classroom fell silent as Elijah made his way to the grand piano. His classmates were watching with a mixture of curiosity and anticipation, most expecting him to fail spectacularly. Elijah sat at the bench, adjusted his position, and began to play. The opening chords came out better than they had at the community center, but still not right. Not like the music he heard in his head. His hands were tense, his movements mechanical. Mr. Davidson stopped him after just 16 measures. "That's enough. You need to relax your hands. And where's the emotion? This isn't just a technical exercise." Elijah nodded, face burning with shame as he returned to his seat. Thomas snickered behind his hand, and even kind-hearted Lily looked embarrassed for him. After class, Mr. Davidson asked Elijah to stay behind again. "The recital is just 2 weeks away," he said, his voice serious. "You're nowhere near ready." "I'm practicing every day," Elijah insisted. "At the community center. They have a piano I can use." Mr. Davidson raised an eyebrow. "A community center piano? Is it even in tune?" "Mostly," Elijah said defensively. "Why not use the practice rooms here?" "I have to catch the bus right after school." And during lunch, Elijah trailed off, not wanting to explain that he used lunch periods to finish homework he couldn't complete at home, where electricity was sometimes shut off when bills ran late. Mr. Davidson studied him for a long moment. "I can arrange for you to use the practice rooms early morning before first period. 7 a.m. the janitor can let you in." Elijah felt a flicker of hope. "That would help." "Thank you, sir." Mr. Davidson's expression remained stern. "Don't thank me yet. You still have a mountain to climb with this piece." As Elijah left the classroom, he felt a strange mix of gratitude and determination. Mr. Davidson might have given him an impossible task, but at least he wasn't giving up on him completely. That evening at the community center, Elijah practiced with renewed intensity. Ms. Reyes stopped by again, listening from the doorway. "You know," she said during one of his breaks, "my brother works as a piano tuner. I could ask him to look at this old thing. Might help your practice." "You don't have to do that," Elijah said quickly. Ms. Reyes smiled. "I know I don't have to, but I want to. You've been working so hard." As Elijah packed up to leave, Ms. Reyes touched his shoulder. "Elijah, can I ask you something? That piece you're playing, it's very advanced. But sometimes when you don't think anyone's listening, you play differently, like you're holding back when people watch." Elijah froze, uncertain how to respond. He hadn't realized anyone had noticed. "It's nothing," he said finally. "I just get nervous when people are watching." Ms. Reyes nodded, but her eyes were thoughtful. "Well, keep at it. I think you might surprise everyone at that recital of yours." Walking home in the cold darkness, Elijah thought about what she'd said. Was he holding back? Or was he simply remembering how the music should sound? How his mother had once played it for him years ago, her fingers dancing across the keys with a grace he couldn't match. The recital was coming fast, and Elijah was running out of time to find out. The morning of the recital arrived with gray skies and a light dusting of snow. Mr. Davidson stood at his classroom window, watching the flakes drift lazily past. His stomach had been in knots all week, a feeling he wasn't accustomed to before student performances. Usually he felt only professional concern, perhaps mild anxiety that his teaching methods would be reflected poorly if a student stumbled. This time was different. This time he'd deliberately set a student up to fail. He turned away from the window, facing the empty classroom. In just 10 hours, the school auditorium would fill with parents, teachers, and administrators. The winter recital was a highlight of Westfield's calendar, often mentioned in their recruitment materials. And somewhere in that program, Elijah Santos would attempt to play a piece that professional pianists spent years mastering. The classroom door opened, startling Mr. Davidson from his thoughts. It was Mrs. Winters from the office. "Just the man I was looking for," she said, bustling in with a folder. "I need your signature on the programs before we print them." Mr. Davidson took the offered pen and flipped through the glossy booklet. When he reached the page listing student performers, his eyes caught on Elijah's name, Elijah Santos, performing Prelude in C minor by Sergei Rachmaninoff. He hesitated, pen hovering above the paper. "Something wrong?" Mrs. Winters asked. "No," Mr. Davidson said, signing quickly. "Everything's fine, but it wasn't fine." Over the past weeks, he'd watched Elijah struggle with the impossible piece. Despite arriving at school before dawn to practice, despite working through lunch periods and staying late whenever his bus schedule allowed, the boy was nowhere near mastering the Rachmaninoff. He could play the notes, slowly, laboriously, but the soul of the piece remained beyond his reach. Mr. Davidson had begun to realize that his teaching moment had gone too far. He'd meant to push Elijah toward accepting his limitations, to help the boy understand that some paths weren't meant for everyone. Instead, he'd potentially set up a public humiliation that could haunt the child for years. The worst part was that Elijah refused to give up. A quieter, more prideful student might have dropped the class or claimed illness on recital day. But Elijah kept showing up, kept working, kept trying, even as failure loomed inevitably closer. As afternoon classes ended, students began preparing for the evening's performance. The girls gathered in bathrooms to fix their hair. Boys adjusted ties and collar buttons in any reflective surface they could find. The excitement was palpable, except around Elijah, who sat alone in a practice room still working on the Rachmaninoff. Mr. Davidson paused outside the door, listening. The boy was playing the middle section, where the music grew quieter, more introspective. His tempo was painfully slow, but for the first time Mr. Davidson heard something beyond mere note playing. There was a hint of feeling there, a shadow of what the piece could be. He moved on without interrupting. It was too little, too late, but at least the boy might make it through without stopping entirely. By 6 o'clock, the performers had gathered backstage. Parents and guests were filtering into the auditorium, programs in hand, cameras ready. Mr. Davidson paced nervously between the green room and the wings, checking that each student was prepared. Lily Chen sat primly in her black dress, reviewing her sheet music. Thomas Williams was cracking jokes to hide his nerves, his dress shoes freshly polished. And in the corner, almost invisible, sat Elijah Santos. Mr. Davidson almost didn't recognize him at first. Gone was the oversized school uniform, replaced by a black suit that actually fit properly. The jacket was slightly faded at the elbows, clearly secondhand but carefully pressed. His hair was neatly combed, and his shoes, while worn, had been polished to a respectable shine. "Mr. Santos," Mr. Davidson said, approaching cautiously. "You look very professional." Elijah glanced up, his expression unreadable. "Thank you, sir. My grandmother helped." Mr. Davidson cleared his throat, suddenly uncomfortable. "About tonight's performance. I want you to know that it's perfectly acceptable to play just a portion of the piece. The first page, perhaps. No one would think less of you." For the first time, Elijah met his gaze directly. "I'm going to play the whole thing." Something in the boy's tone gave Mr. Davidson pause. There was a quiet determination there beyond mere stubbornness. "Very well," he said. "You're scheduled toward the end of the program. Try to relax until then." The recital began precisely at 7. Mr. Davidson gave his usual welcome speech, highlighting the importance of music education and praising his students' hard work. As he spoke, his eyes caught on Elijah's grandmother in the 5th row, sitting straight and proud in her best dress, a small bouquet of grocery store flowers clutched in her hands. The performances proceeded as expected. Lily was technically flawless, if somewhat mechanical. Thomas surprised everyone with an emotionally mature interpretation of his Chopin waltz. Each student received polite, enthusiastic applause. Before he knew it, Mr. Davidson was announcing, "And now Elijah Santos performing Prelude in C minor by Sergei Rachmaninoff." A murmur ran through the audience. Those who knew music recognized the challenging choice. Several faculty members exchanged confused glances. Elijah walked to the grand piano with measured steps. Unlike his usual hunched posture, he stood straight, almost formal. He adjusted the bench carefully, took a deep breath, and placed his hands on the keys. Then he closed his eyes. Mr. Davidson tensed, preparing for disaster. Starting such a difficult piece with closed eyes was either profound arrogance or utter foolishness. A hush fell over the auditorium. The silence stretched for 3 long seconds. Then Elijah began to play. The opening chords, those massive, demanding stretches that had given the boy so much trouble, rang out with startling clarity and confidence. Not broken or arpeggiated as he'd practiced, but solid and resonant, his small hands somehow spanning the impossible distances. Mr. Davidson blinked in confusion. This was not the laborious playing he'd heard in class. These weren't the hesitant notes of a struggling beginner. As Elijah continued, the music gained momentum, flowing with a dark, brooding energy that Rachmaninoff had intended but few pianists fully captured. His hands moved across the keyboard with astonishing dexterity, navigating the complex middle section with ease. In the wings, Mr. Davidson stood frozen, unable to process what he was hearing. Around him, the other students had stopped their whispered conversations, drawn by the unexpected mastery coming from the stage. The audience, too, had fallen completely silent. No coughing, no shuffling programs, no whispered comments, just rapt attention as the small boy at the piano unleashed the full power of Rachmaninoff's Prelude. When Elijah reached the thunderous climax, his hands blurring across the keys in a cascade of sound, Mrs. Winters gasped audibly from her seat near the front. The music swelled to fill every corner of the auditorium, by turns passionate and tender, technically flawless yet deeply emotional. Mr. Davidson felt a chill run up his spine. In 30 years of teaching, he had never heard a student play with such maturity and insight. This wasn't just talent or practice. This was something else entirely, something rare and precious. As the final chords faded into silence, Elijah's hands hovered above the keys for a moment before coming to rest in his lap. He opened his eyes slowly as if waking from a dream. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. Then the audience erupted. The applause was thunderous, immediate. People rose to their feet as if pulled by strings. Someone shouted, "Bravo," from the back row. Elijah's grandmother was crying openly, the forgotten flowers crushed against her heart. Elijah himself seemed startled by the response. He stood awkwardly, gave a quick, unpracticed bow, and hurried off stage. Mr. Davidson caught him in the wings, too overwhelmed to speak. Around them, the other students stared with wide eyes and open mouths. "How did you?" Mr. Davidson finally managed. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Elijah looked at his shoes. "My mother taught me," he said quietly. "She was a concert pianist in the Philippines before she came here. We used to have a piano at home. I practiced every day since I was 4. But in class, you could barely play a scale," Mr. Davidson said, still struggling to reconcile what he'd just witnessed with the student he thought he knew. "After the accident, after we lost our piano, I stopped playing," Elijah explained. "It hurt too much. When I came to Westfield, I tried to start over, pretend I was just beginning. But then you assigned the Rachmaninoff. Your mother taught you this piece," Mr. Davidson realized. Elijah nodded. It was one of her favorites. She used to play it on special occasions. His voice grew softer. "I was afraid if I played it well, everyone would know. And then the memories would come back too strong." Mr. Davidson felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. All those weeks of watching Elijah struggle, of thinking he was teaching the boy a lesson about limitations, when all along the child had been holding back, protecting himself from grief. Why tonight, he asked. Why show your true abilities now? Elijah looked toward the stage where the next student was nervously preparing to perform after his show-stopping act. Because she would have wanted me to, he said simply, and because I remembered that playing was how she showed her love. I didn't want to hide that anymore. Mr. Davidson had no words. In trying to teach Elijah Santos about accepting failure, he had instead been taught a profound lesson about resilience, grief, and the hidden depths that exist in every person, even a quiet boy in an oversized uniform who sat in the back of the class. The morning after the recital, Westfield Academy buzzed with excitement. Students who normally paid no attention to classical music were talking about that scholarship kid who played the insane piano piece. Teachers who hadn't attended were hearing secondhand accounts from colleagues who had, their descriptions growing more dramatic with each telling. Mr. Davidson arrived early, as was his habit, but found his classroom already occupied. Mrs. Winters and Principal Roberts were waiting for him, along with an elegantly dressed woman he didn't recognize. Henry, Principal Roberts said, rising from his seat at the piano bench, we were just discussing last night's performance. Quite extraordinary. Mr. Davidson set down his briefcase, unsure what to say. The events of the previous evening still felt dreamlike. Impossible. This is Ms. Blackwell, Mrs. Winters said, gesturing to the elegant stranger. She's the director of the Riverside Youth Symphony. Ms. Blackwell stepped forward, extending her hand. I attended the recital last night at the invitation of a board member. I'm very interested in speaking with your student, Elijah Santos. I see, Mr. Davidson said, shaking her hand automatically. May I ask why? Ms. Blackwell raised an eyebrow. Surely that's obvious. The boy is extraordinarily gifted. We have a scholarship program for exceptional young musicians, and he would be a perfect candidate. Principal Roberts beamed. This is exactly the kind of opportunity Westfield prides itself on providing. One of our scholarship students receiving recognition from Riverside. It's wonderful publicity. Mr. Davidson felt a twinge of discomfort at the principal's focus on publicity rather than Elijah himself. I'm sure Elijah would be honored, but perhaps we should discuss this with him and his grandmother first. Of course, Ms. Blackwell agreed. I've already arranged to meet with them this afternoon. I was hoping you might join us as Elijah's teacher. The word teacher hit Mr. Davidson like a physical blow. What kind of teacher had he been to Elijah? Not the mentor and guide he'd prided himself on being for 3 decades, but someone who had tried to push the boy toward failure out of his own misjudgment. I'll be there, he said quietly. Throughout the day, Mr. Davidson found himself distracted, barely hearing his students' questions, losing his place in lectures. When Elijah walked into class for 5th period, the room fell silent. The boy who had been practically invisible now drew every eye. Elijah seemed uncomfortable with the attention, sliding into his seat with his shoulders hunched just as before. But there was something different about him, too, a straightness to his spine that hadn't been there before, as if some great weight had been lifted. Mr. Santos, Mr. Davidson said, would you stay after class for a moment? When the bell rang and the other students filed out, several patting Elijah awkwardly on the shoulder as they passed, teacher and student faced each other across the empty classroom. I owe you an apology, Mr. Davidson said without preamble. Elijah looked up, surprised. Sir, I assigned you the Rachmaninoff because I thought it would prove you didn't belong in music class, Mr. Davidson admitted, the words painful but necessary. I saw your struggles and assumed you lacked talent. I was trying to push you toward what I thought was an inevitable realization. Elijah's expression was thoughtful rather than angry. I know, he said simply. You knew? Mr. Davidson asked, taken aback. It was pretty obvious, Elijah said with a shrug. No teacher gives Rachmaninoff to a beginner unless they're trying to make a point. Mr. Davidson winced at the accuracy of the assessment. Then why didn't you tell me you could play? Why go through weeks of pretending to struggle? Elijah was quiet for a long moment, looking down at his hands. Those remarkable hands that had produced such music. After my parents died, playing hurt too much. Every note reminded me of my mother. When I came to Westfield, I thought I could just start over, be normal, not the kid whose concert pianist mother died. He looked up, meeting Mr. Davidson's gaze. But then you assigned that piece. Her piece. And suddenly I had to decide. Keep hiding or remember her the way she'd want to be remembered? The simple wisdom in the boy's words left Mr. Davidson speechless. He'd spent 30 years teaching music, yet this 12-year-old understood something about its true purpose that he had somehow forgotten. The director of Riverside Youth Symphony was here this morning, Mr. Davidson said when he found his voice again. She wants to meet with you and your grandmother about a scholarship. Elijah's eyes widened. Really? But they're the best youth orchestra in the state. They recognize talent when they hear it, Mr. Davidson said, even if your teacher didn't. That afternoon, Mr. Davidson drove to Pine Heights for the first time. The neighborhood was as challenged as he'd imagined. Worn apartment buildings, barred windows on small businesses, cracked sidewalks. Yet there were also unexpected signs of community, window boxes with winter plants, children playing in a small park, neighbors greeting each other by name. Elijah's building was on a quiet side street. The apartment was small but immaculately kept, with photographs covering one wall and the delicious smell of something simmering on the stove. Mr. Davidson, Elijah's grandmother said, welcoming him with dignified warmth. Please come in. We are honored to have Elijah's teacher visit us. Ms. Blackwell arrived moments later, and they gathered around the small kitchen table as Ms. Blackwell explained the scholarship program, weekly private lessons, ensemble practice, performance opportunities, and eventually, college recommendations. Elijah's expression shifted from disbelief to cautious hope. There's just one problem, Elijah said when she finished. I don't have a piano to practice on at home. The scholarship includes practice time at our facilities, Ms. Blackwell assured him. And, Mr. Davidson added, surprising himself, Westfield's practice rooms are open to you whenever you need them. Morning lunch after school? I'll make sure of it. The meeting concluded with handshakes and forms to complete. As Ms. Blackwell prepared to leave, she turned to Mr. Davidson. You've done a remarkable job with Elijah. It's rare to find such mature musicality in one so young. Mr. Davidson couldn't bring himself to take credit. Elijah's mother was his first teacher. I merely provided the opportunity. After Ms. Blackwell left, Elijah's grandmother insisted Mr. Davidson stay for a cup of tea. As Elijah went to fetch their photo albums to show his teacher pictures of his mother at the piano, Mr. Davidson found himself alone with the older woman. Thank you, she said quietly, her accent more pronounced with emotion, for seeing what was hidden in my grandson. I didn't see it, Mr. Davidson admitted. Not until last night, she smiled gently. But you gave him the push he needed. After we lost my daughter and her husband, after we had to sell their piano, Elijah locked that part of himself away. He needed someone to challenge him to make him face the music again. Her eyes glistened with tears. Even if that wasn't your intention, you have my gratitude. 6 months later, Mr. Davidson sat in the front row of the Riverside Concert Hall. On stage, the Youth Symphony was performing their spring showcase, and Elijah sat at the grand piano for Grieg's Piano Concerto in a minor. His playing had grown even more assured, his technique refined by proper teaching and daily practice. Mr. Davidson had helped arrange a used piano for Elijah's apartment, a joint donation from the Westfield Music Department faculty after he'd reluctantly shared the boy's story. He'd also started a formal scholarship program for talented musicians from underserved communities, named in honor of Elijah's mother. As Elijah's hands danced across the keys, Mr. Davidson reflected on how much had changed in just half a year. The boy who had been invisible was now being courted by prestigious summer programs. The teacher who had prided himself on spotting talent had been humbled into recognizing his own blindness. Most importantly, Mr. Davidson had rediscovered something he'd nearly forgotten in 30 years of teaching. Music wasn't just about technique or talent or performance. It was about connection, to emotions, to memories, to the people we love and lose and carry with us in unexpected ways. When the performance ended and thunderous applause filled the concert hall, Elijah looked out across the audience until he found Mr. Davidson. Their eyes met, and the boy gave a small nod, not quite a bow but an acknowledgement. Between them passed an understanding that transcended words, teacher and student, challenge and response, mistake and forgiveness, music and meaning. In trying to teach Elijah about limitations, Mr. Davidson had instead been taught the most important lesson of his career, that sometimes the greatest gifts remain hidden until someone provides the right piece of music. even for all the wrong reasons.